So here we are. Yeah, so we have this guy Aristotle to talk about this week. I guess what I'll ask first is, because I found in my other two sections of this course, we didn't really get into who this guy is, or not really even into why we're reading him. But do you guys have any experience with Aristotle? I'm wondering, like, you could just kind of wave a hand maybe, like how many people have had to read something by Aristotle in your life in the course of your education? Maybe, or read about him, like in some class it was like important for some reason that you, yeah. Oh, look, cute. People are raising digital hands. Sorry. I'm not a Zoomer. I don't know how this works. Anyway, anybody have any questions about who this guy is? Why we're reading him? I like to be question oriented. In other words, I'd rather hear what you guys want to know rather than just throw information at you, which, believe me, like my job is to fill silence. So if you give me silence, I'll start yapping and you won't get a word in edgewise. But so who is this guy Aristotle to you? What do you know about him? What do you want to know about him? And you can complain about him too. You could be like, why do we have to care? Why are we starting with this ancient abstruse text by some 300 or 2,300-year-old dead weirdo? You know, any comments or questions about what we're reading before we get into the text itself? You know what I mean?
Are there no like new current philosophers that you guys, like other philosophy people, think are like equivalent to like old people like Aristotle?
Ooh, that's a solid question. And the question hinges on equivalent. Equivalent, what would that mean? Yeah, there's this way in which it's not that the older, yeah, so why are we reading something very, very old? Maybe that's a way to ask, to start with your question, and your name is Mara, or is it Mara?
No, it's Mara.
Mara, cool. No, Mara's, that's a great question. And there's an easy answer, and then there's a very long answer. Let me give you the easy one first. I chose to read him because I am a fanatic of the classics. So I got to design what we read in this course. And so whenever I'm given a topic, and this is just the nature of the beast, which is me, my first thought is to go back as far as I can and see what was written about this topic as long ago as I can. And this might strike many of you rightly as completely irrelevant. You know, this might not be the best approach, but it was my approach. So here we are. Yeah. So is there any recent philosophers as equivalent? In terms of influence and impact on the world, I'd say, yeah, absolutely. Like, love him or hate him, Karl Marx has had a much more major and impactful influence on the modern world than Aristotle. But the thing about boy, your question is so big and interesting that it's hard for me to even answer without taking this whole class period. So let me just see what I can do. Aristotle is important because for 2,300 years, the West has thought he was important. You know, does that make sense? Like he's been so important for so long, and every year adds to that importance that he's sort of earned that is his higher place in philosophy. Not that he's smarter, not that his method is better. A lot of people think it is, because in a way, I mean, relative to what's out there now, because his method is kind of the scientific method, which is what our world runs on, you know? Let me give you an example though. There was a very prominent 20th century philosopher named Alfred North Whitehead, or is it Alfred Whitehead. He said somewhere that all of philosophy is, after Plato, is just a footnote to Plato, which means Aristotle is the first big footnote. I personally don't believe that's true or even good, that we're all just commenting on the first philosopher, the guy who coined the word philosophia, the love of wisdom. We got that from Plato, maybe from Socrates. That's, yeah. But yeah, these older philosophers have just been so influential. It's not that they're better, not that modern philosophers aren't equally brilliant. It's just that they've been there all along. So one reason we read Aristotle, so let me put it this way. For last week's class, we read the namesake of our university. This week's class, we're reading something like the underwriter of the university itself. That is to say that one thing Aristotle loved to do, one thing that was sort of core to his thinking was categories and boxing topics into sort of different genres of thinking or disciplines, subjects. This book, for instance, is called Ethics. It was sort of the first time that word was used for an entire question of thinking, an entire way of thinking. And it's still there. We still talk about ethics. Why? Because Aristotle. There's a discipline called physics. It's distinct from biology. It's distinct from chemistry. Why? Because of Aristotle. There's metaphysics because of Aristotle. There's biology because of Aristotle. There's politics because of Aristotle, and poetics because of Aristotle. These are distinct boxes of human activities because of Aristotle. So in a way, the different departments in a university, as they still are, and not just in the West anymore, but in the entire world, are the way they are because of Aristotle. So this, you could say, is for better or worse, but we're still inside of Aristotle's intellectual boxes. So I find maybe it's a good way to start, since we're opening a big intellectual box in this course, is to dive into the one that he made and see if we like it and see if we don't. Nothing, by the way, that I assign in this course is normative. That is to say, I'm not agreeing with Aristotle because I'm assigning Aristotle. I'm just putting out something for us to talk about, and then we can take issue with it. But I really want to see what he has to say about this, because I wager, this is my bet or my wager in assigning him, that I guess two things, which I have a little PowerPoint that I'll throw out in a minute. One is that we will recognize his definition of happiness in our own definition of happiness in a way that maybe we all share. But two, that we might learn something about our definition of happiness by seeing that what we think Aristotle is saying is not, how to put this, by seeing that Aristotle's definition of happiness is very different from ours, but that when we kind of look at it carefully, we might notice that ours, you'll see what I mean by this in a minute, that our definition of happiness does sort of include this way of looking at it that maybe we don't even think about too often. So that's sort of anticipating, and maybe I hope that becomes clearer over the next 50 minutes or so. Yeah, Aristotle got himself bound up into some very important historical stuff. Well, important because we've been told for 2,000 years that it's important. For instance, his dad was the physician, the doctor, like kind of the doctor to Philip II. That's Alexander the Great's dad. And so when Alexander the Great was a kid, at least a lot of sources tell us, Philip II hired Aristotle, this guy, to teach Alexander the Great. So he was sort of tutored, like the most famous conqueror in history, which actually might have gotten him killed, sort of. Alexander the Great was murdered when he was very young, and it was only a few months later Aristotle fled Athens. Athens hated Alexander the Great. He fled and died, and that's all we know. So, okay, so that's a very long question. I hope, Mara, I've satisfied you at least a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. What else? Any other sort of big questions? And then I want to kind of show something in this little, I'll show you something, this little PDF thing that I made. Life, the universe, and everything via Aristotle. Any big questions? Cool. Let me just show you a few things. So can everyone see a nice painting? Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I love this painting. This is, anyone know this? Anyone ever been to Rome, the Vatican? This is, sorry, I can only see a few faces, so people are nodding enthusiastically. I don't know. But this is by Raphael, sort of one of the late Italian Renaissance masters. It's called the School of Athens. He didn't know what the School of Athens looked like. It certainly didn't look like this. But he's got Plato here, this kind of fogey, and then he's got this slightly younger Aristotle. So Aristotle was one of Plato's students when he was still alive, in this little inbred compound of just a couple hundred guys who have had such an endless influence on philosophy. But then the rest of this is supposed to be sort of a who's who of philosophers. But what's fun about this painting is that Raphael painted his contemporaries into it. So this is Plato, but what it actually is a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. This is a philosopher named Heraclitus, but it's also a portrait of Michelangelo. I don't know who this lazy guy is, but there he is. Somewhere around here, right there, is Raphael himself. So if you can look into this if you want, but I don't know why anyone would, but it is kind of huge and pretty to look at. So anyway, what I wanted to do here real quick is, well, it's kind of two things. One, I wanted to point to the fact that we're reading a translation. So Aristotle didn't write in English, obviously. He wrote in what we call ancient Greek. So we're dealing with translation, and especially in such a careful philosophical text, translation is a big problem because there are never one-to-one lexical equivalents, word-to-word equivalents between any two languages, never. And so given the fact that this guy was writing in an ancient language, now dead, nobody is a native speaker in ancient Greek. And given that English didn't even exist for 1,000 years before, in any form that we could read, 1,000 years before, until 1,000 years after he wrote, we have a bit of a problem, especially with the key terms. So happiness. When you saw happiness in this text, okay, that was, I said I was going to do things. One, point to the translation problem. Two, give answers to questions that I think will come up later in this class. So I'm giving you the answers and the questions will come later. So one is the word happiness. So what is the word happiness in Greek? Well, the word is eudaimonia was the word that is translated happiness. You could say eudaimonia. It's sometimes said in English, like as if we've adopted the word almost. Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia simply does not mean what we mean by happiness. It's just the best we can do. It's the best we can do with one word to get at this word. So how does it mean what it means? It's two parts. There's a prefix, eu, or you, which is we have this you in a lot of places. You have euphoria is one. Can anyone think of any other you words?
Utopia.
Utopia, right? Which usually utopia doesn't have the E in front of it. Oh, I wish I could type on the screen. This is fun. If you've ever read Utopia or heard the word, Thomas More, I'm going to put this in the chat. So wait, why am I writing only people, everyone in meeting? That's what I want. So here's how we see utopia, right? Not EU. And that's a trick. That's a pun, because it's like it either could be utopia, which is the best place, the fortunate good place, or it could be utopia, which means this place doesn't exist. That means not, never, utopia. So it's kind of fun. So yeah, also, if that made no sense, forget it. It's just a little fun. Anyway, so means good. Here's another example is eugenics. The idea of like breeding for the better, this sort of horrible Nazi, usually associated with like Nazi Germany and stuff. Okay, so that's the one part. The next part is the word daimon. This is interesting. This word is very important in early philosophy and then very important in things like Christianity. This is the demon word, or the source of our word demon, but it didn't mean demon. It could mean a god, or it could mean a goddess. It could mean like a divine or a semi-divine spirit or person. It could also mean one's destiny or one's lot, or the force that controls one's destiny. But it also means like one's particular genius. What makes one wonderful? What makes one able to be awesome and to do awesome things? One's knowing or one's know-how. All of these things it could mean. In other words, this word was used in different contexts. You could see some like carpenter really just banging the heck out of some awesome cart or something. And you could be like, we would say genius. They would say, look at that, look at his daimon. So famously for philosophy, Socrates, whom you've probably heard a lot about, but who never wrote anything. We know about this guy because of Plato. But Socrates was fond of sort of making a nuisance of himself around Athens. And one of the public sort of dramatic little public performances he would do is that he would suddenly like stop dead in the middle of the street. This is in several dialogues of Plato. And he would sort of just start drifting, like looking off into space. And people would be like, Socrates, what the heck are you doing, man? Go, like, clear out. We're trying to walk here. And he'd be like, my daimon has come to me. And that would mean, in that case, it probably means something like insight or inspiration. So daimon, a couple things about daimon. So happiness is something like the state of having a good daimon, or having a thoroughly good, being well daimoned. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so two things about this word. One, or that is the word daimon. For Aristotle, this would not have had a negative connotation. You might be able to see how Christian Greek, would poach this word to mean demons, because in Greek you could refer to the gods, and there were many, with the word daimones. And from a Christian perspective, those gods are not gods at all, they're demons, right? So you could see how the term could be pulled to mean something negative in a Christian perspective. Two, and this is important too for the text, this is not the word soul then translated. That's another word, psyche, or psyche, as we would say. And that word is, we might learn a little bit about what this word means to a Greek, like Aristotle, by contrasting it with daimon, the word that you see in this text translated as soul. Oops, not human yet. Psyche doesn't have the sense of excellence and knowledge and inspiration. Psyche is just the basic life force that makes you alive, as opposed to dead. Yeah, so if your soul leaves your body, that means your body's a corpse. Daimon can come and go, like with Socrates. It might make you feel alive, but psyche just makes you simply alive. It's your animating life force. All right, so that's psyche has taken on a different meaning than it would have meant for Aristotle. Although Plato actually also coined the term psychology to mean what's kind of just going on in the basic activity of your brain. Whereas daimon would mean what's going on in your brain when you're really jamming, when you're on like firing on all cylinders, like really thinking. So eudaimonia. All right, so one other term I want to talk about. So that was happiness. Another word we see a lot in here is human. Or when it says men or man, and it means like all of us, like we're so misogynistic, you know, it's like, oh yeah, we're all men, but you know, some of us are women. I don't know, it's so funny. Anyway, so you probably know this one, or you could probably have sort of, but you've probably seen this one before, anthropos. So this is the word that gives us like anthropology, the study of humans. So I'm bringing this up because Aristotle is able to, Greek had a sort of flexibility, even more flexibility in making up new words, deriving words than English. And English is really good at it. I have a cup. I can cup someone. If they need a cup, it's like, hey, here, I'll cup you. Doesn't make much sense, right? But you know what I mean. I can do that. I just make it a verb. Well, Greek could do that even more. So there's a verb that shows up in Aristotle's Ethics a few times where he takes human and he verbs it. And he makes this verb, anthropoesthai. I know, it's Greek, it's a mouthful. Anthropoesthai, which is a really cool word. And the best way to translate it, which would make you see like, that's odd, which I think is a useful moment of pause, is to say this means to human. But I could expand it a little and make it more clear, but maybe less awesome by saying to do what a human does. But we don't really have access to a verb like this. Just you can feel it because you probably have never heard anyone say, you are humaning today. It's like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just humaning, or you're humaning really well. Doesn't work, right? Well, for Aristotle, it was no problem. So happiness is a state of having your genius, your being, your genius or your lot be in a good state. And then the human can be an activity. Human can be an activity. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing for a little bit, hopefully in more ways than one, so we can talk about what this book actually says. And instead of diving into a really specific question, I would just want to ask, I'll put it this way, what did you think? What do you think in the most general way? In other words, what do you want us to talk about in this text? What questions might you have, or questions, anything large or small, or were there any particular passages where you were like, that's interesting, or that's stupid? Where do you want to start? I'm not assuming anyone made it through here with like rigorous attention, but there might have been a few places where you were like, huh, that's weird. Like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That how can you, yeah.
I noticed that he talked a lot about different sciences, and that's it.
Different
lot of, like-
sciences? Is that what
Yeah,
you
he
said?
talked, yeah.
Yeah.
Where it was like around chapter 1, he talked about like the arts and science.
Right. Well, that's a fine place to start, actually, because chapter 1, just the very beginning of this, will get us into something like how Aristotle treats things. And he wrote a lot of books. And if you ever read another one, you'll probably be able to say like, oh yeah, there he's doing his thing again. So like, what's his thing? Anybody have any thoughts on chapter 1? Or what sort of, by the way, these chapters aren't his. It's just places where our editor and translator thought it made a good break, but I think they're pretty good. So what would you sense is the goal of chapter 1? What's he trying to get across? Anyone get a sense? By the way, off to the side comment real quick. I'm never interested. I don't care. I don't really need you guys ever to just like perform your competence or demonstrate that you've read the text or anything when I ask for comments. It doesn't matter if you feel like you don't understand something, or if you don't have a well-constructed thought. I don't really care. I just want to talk about stuff. So don't think I'm, in other words, looking to check that you've read the text or something. Just seeing what you think. All right, back in.
So while I was reading it, majority of the time, I did not completely understand what he was talking about. But I got the sense that it had to do with happiness.
Yeah, it has to do with happiness. Right. So I underscored that word a minute ago because I want to know what happiness means for Aristotle. So maybe we'll get there. But yeah, your other, Jacqueline, I like the majority of the time you didn't understand him. That's fair. And there's a kind of a good reason for that. And that is that whereas for Plato, we have all of these very carefully constructed dramatic dialogues that he put a lot of time into and made into basically forms of literature. Aristotle, though he wrote those sort of things too, we've lost them all. What we have are his lecture notes. That's it. All of the treatises are probably just his lecture notes. So we're missing everything. We're missing everything that matters, the context. Aristotle apparently liked to just walk around in circles and people had to sort of follow him. So you could imagine how difficult it would be to keep up with him literally, even in person. We're left with just his notes, 2,300-year-old notes. It's very hard to understand. And sometimes the grammar isn't even sensible, as if he jotted them off or something, or maybe even people were taking notes as he walked around in a circle. This is hard. So yeah, if you didn't find this to be easy, or if you didn't think you got everything in it, you're on the same page with everyone. So, but let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do, trying to look close, zoom in close and see what we can say. So in the first bit, anyone else have any idea about just the very beginning? And then if you, oh yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No.
What I got from the beginning was that he was talking about anything, like any art, any thoughts, these actions will help go towards like a greater good, like it'll help you improve the society. So maybe that improving society might help with happiness for people.
Great. So you actually, I'm trying to learn your name. So Emily, I think got maybe the key point, which is that we can talk about lots of activities. So the title of this book is Ethics. You could probably translate that as human activities. What we do. How about that? I'm going to make a translation of Aristotle's Ethics, and it's going to be called What We Do. Anyway, so what do we do? Well, some things that we do are like building stuff. In fact, we could say that just about everything we do has some aim. Yeah. So there's different ways we can talk about these aims. So let's take some of his examples. Let's take a shipbuilder. Let's take a shipbuilder and we'll take a soldier, you know? Well, you can look at what they do in those particular activities. We can shelve for a moment the idea that they're human and pretend that they're just a shipbuilder and like just a soldier. Well, what they are doing is completely different. So this is a problem for philosophy in general, because philosophy wants to be able to say things about all of us. They want to say things that work under all circumstances, anywhere, no matter where you are. So Plato and Aristotle have two different places to start in this problem. Aristotle starts with the many things. They're all different. So let's take a shipbuilder and a soldier. They're very different. One sits around all day and makes ships. One sits around all day and kills people, right? I can look at a shipbuilder and I can say that they're doing a verb, shipbuilding, to shipbuild. And I can look at the soldier and say to kill or to soldier, you know? I can also say if the shipbuilder is building well or not so well, you know? Your ship sucks. You're not doing a very good job at shipbuilding. Your ship's freaking awesome. It's floating and everything. You are doing a good job at shipbuilding. Similarly, you are killing the crap out of your enemy. Or, my God, you are getting beat up. You are soldiering well or not. So you can talk about good in each of those activities. You can also talk about good or bad, right? Degrees. So, but that doesn't get them any closer together. You can also talk about what they're doing it for, right? So I can talk to the soldier and I can be like, why are you killing people? And I might get any number of answers, but I bet there'll be some of the same answers I might get from that shipbuilder. For instance, soldier, why are you killing people? I just love it. You're like, yeesh, but that's an answer. He could be like, the pay is good. He could be like, okay, he likes the money. He's like, I like to travel, you know? Okay, that's a reason to kill people, fine. Shipbuilder, why do you build ships? And he could be like, I just love it. And you'd be like, oh, okay. So you'd be like, I like the money, right? So suddenly when we talk about what you're doing these things for, we move up to what Emily called a greater good, which so far is just why you're doing something. Some of the answers might start to converge, right? You might say, it's good to kill people for Athens or something, or it's good to build ships. And suddenly there's a sense in which you're doing it for something that is bigger than the activity itself. So this is the key Aristotelian step, which is in chapter 1. Some goods, some activities have as their goal a higher activity, yeah, a better good. So I'm good at shipbuilding, but why am I doing it? To make ships for my country. I'm killing people, I'm good at doing it, but why am I doing it? To support my country. So suddenly there's a higher good, and it's like building a better country. So you can say that my activity, by the way, is anything I'm saying making sense here? A little bit, maybe not. Okay, so my activity, my particular activity can be seen in terms of a scale of goods. And I can ramp up to higher goods that sort of include my activities. So chapter 1 is sort of, he calls them architectonic. Those are the higher goods. So some goods are sort of higher up in the chain than others. Let's say I am a cart builder, right? And let's say I have a team of wheel makers and axle makers and like floorboard makers. And so all of those activities have a good, but my good uses their activities to make a higher good, which is the whole cart, you know? So we go from like species of activities, and we can go up to what Aristotle would call genuses of activities. We can keep going. He says we can keep ramping this up, and this is sort of in chapter 2. The architectonics, it's almost as if he's saying it's like architecture, like you can build up and see the goods converge. So I can ask the shipbuilder what is the best thing he can do, and he'd be like, build ships. And the soldier, I could be like, what's the best thing you can do? And it's like, kill people. But then I can also sort of ask more in general. It's like, well, what's the greater good to which you guys are both kind of aiming for? And it'd be like, well, you know, I want wealth. And you could be like, why? It's like, well, I want to be able to buy food for my family. Why? So we can be happy. Happy. Aristotle says everybody will eventually converge on why, if you ask them why they do stuff enough, they'll converge towards happiness. And that is to say, that once I get to happiness, there's nothing farther I can go to say that's why I'm doing it. You know what I mean? Like once I ramp up to happiness, there is no greater good. I am not in the business of happiness in order to get something else. The buck stops at happiness. So all of this, I think, is very tightly compressed into chapter 1, which is a good reason why it was probably hard to derive. But if you read enough Aristotle, this is what he does everywhere. We usually call this inductive logic, induction, where you start with lots of particulars and you climb up a scale to get to a higher principle. Plato, by the way, always liked to start at the highest principle and then try to reason his way down to the particulars. So for instance, if you asked him what makes a good ship, he would say, well, let us think about the ideal ship, the ultimate ship. And all of the ships you see are just crummy versions of the ideal ship. So the particulars are just divergences from the highest thing. Aristotle worked in reverse. He liked to start with all of the particulars and then try to derive principles. If any of you are in science, you might notice something familiar. This is the scientific method in a slightly older form. Okay, I've been talking for forever. So why in a book about what humans do are we immediately thrown off track or maybe put on track on the topic of happiness? This is the answer. He says basically that there's a hierarchy of what we do. And we can look up and get better and better and better and find a place where we can't get any better, where there's no reason for which we're doing something. That's happiness. That's the ultimate goal. What do you think? Does that sound about right to anyone? Or does anyone have a problem with this? One could poke holes in this. This isn't ironclad. This is just how Aristotle sets it up. You ask yourselves, right? Like, for instance, let me put it this way. I'm a professor. I can professor well, hopefully I am, or I can professor poorly. And people can agree on whether I'm doing it well or poorly for various reasons. But if somebody asks me why I'm professoring well, I can actually pretty quickly say, because it makes me happy. But I can also say, so I can get paid, so I can make my family, healthy, so I can be happy, so we can be happy, right? So that's one part of me. There's another part of me. I'm a son. Yeah. I can sun well or I can sun badly. Aristotle's wager is that if I ask myself why I would sun well, it will ultimately also converge on happiness, not just for me, but for my parents, for my family, etc. So he says this is where we end. Can anyone think of anything higher than happiness in this way? This is kind of a good way to define what happiness is. Like, is there nothing better than happiness? Like, is it the ultimate good? If you don't have an answer, that's fine, but that's what he's proposing, is that there is something that we can agree on, all of us, no matter what we do, no matter what we find pleasure in, we can agree on one thing, and that is happiness is the ultimate good.
I think we can agree that we all want to be happy, but I don't think we collectively know, like, okay, what's going to make me happy isn't always
Right.
what's going to make you happy. So for instance, you were talking about like being a great son. So like for me, being a great daughter might be one thing, but like I might disappoint my parents, but it might make me happy, or I might not want to talk to them anymore, and that might be disappointing, but it makes me happy. So why does it matter? It's all relative.
Right. Okay, so there's the question. Aristotle, by getting to this ultimate good and saying that all of us share happiness, eudaimonia, if we want to make sure we're distinguishing, because we're going to need to find out what this happiness means. But isn't it all important that different things make different people happy? Doesn't that sort of break down the ladder that Aristotle's built in a sense? Maybe. And does he, then another question is, does he agree with Mara? Is it the case that happiness is different for all of us? If it is, philosophy breaks down, because if we can't make claims that are good for everyone, then we can't really talk about this. Everybody's just sent off into their own corner. Courtney had her little yellow hand up. And a couple.
So I was just gonna kind of go off what Mara was saying about how like happiness is relative. So is there truly one good? Like, say you fixed all the problems in the world, right? Like tomorrow we woke up, there wasn't world hunger, there wasn't war, there wasn't any of these things. Would everyone be happy? No. So I think, and then you think about, you know, there's materialistic people, there's minimalistic people, there's people that value money over love, or they value money over different things, or they value love over different things. So to define happiness truly is individualistic. It's not meant to be a communal thing, because at times what can make you happy can be selfish. And it's also like what you were saying about being a good son. Okay, well, I grew up in a very different family than my boyfriend. Me being a good daughter in my family might not be being a good daughter in their family. You know, they have different expectations and things that they want from their children. And that can come in value, or that can come in, you know, the same, going back to the same idea of, is it about money? Is it about love? Is it about acts of service? So I think it's just very, very individualistic.
Yeah. So yeah. So Courtney, you're actually getting us toward one of those things I was saying we're going to crash into, which is the fact that Aristotle's sense of happiness will look like ours, but I think it will also diverge sharply. So Aristotle would agree with you, I think, and he says this in some places, that it seems that everybody has their own happiness, and that's very individualistic. But you said it's not communal. I think that was your word. And Aristotle sharply disagrees, because everything about Aristotle is a hierarchy. So the individuals, I mean, I'm going to try to use my video here. The individual happinesses are down here. But as we ramp up, we get farther and farther away from the individual and more in the realm of the human, the thing that we all share. So when we get rid of shipbuilder, soldier, son, professor, whatever, then I'm kind of talking more and more about myself as a human. We're not ignoring these things, but it's as if we're trying to get to something that all of the things, the individuals, all of the individual happinesses share. So, but anyway, Courtney, why I said that he would disagree with you about the communal is that he thinks as we ramp up, happiness, what it means to be happy, gets bigger than you. And he says, well, actually, this thing that we're doing, we call ethics, it actually breaks into a different field of discussion, which is he calls politics, which is basically the community. The polis was what the name of like the city state. Athens was a polis. So for instance, at the end of chapter 2, he says, for even if this is the same thing for an individual and a city, that is to say the human good, to secure and preserve the good of the city appears to be something greater and more complete. The good of the individual by himself is certainly desirable enough, but that of a nation and of cities is nobler and more divine. In other words, the happiness of the many is more important than the happiness of the individual. So that's an interesting comment. So how that can be, what it can mean to talk about the happiness of the many, of the community. Eventually, the goal, which I think may be part of what I'm hearing in Courtney's and maybe even Mara's comments, is that like this goal is kind of this goal isn't really the best goal. This philosophical goal isn't actually getting us to anything that matters. But his goal is that we can talk about the happiness of humanity, the happiness of humans as such themselves, which is bigger than any city, which is bigger than any individual. Anyway, sorry, I'm dominating here. I see Emily's yellow hand.
So I thought about it differently. I thought about how people have their own individual idea of what happiness could be, but I feel like some people long for it and they never achieve it. Like some people change careers like halfway through their life and go a completely different route than what they started because they're trying to achieve that happiness, but they can't necessarily find it in what they do, which I think is what Aristotle is like touching on in the 3rd chapter, how people long for it so much that they can't necessarily achieve it because they don't know exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, right. So the variability of happiness, even within one's own life, is there's also chapter 4. If you don't mind, Madia, where does the emphasis fall?
Medea is fine.
Medea, if you can hang on 1 second, I wanted to look at something in response to, oh, who was just talking? Was it Emily?
Yes.
Yes, in response to Emily's comment. So chapter 3 starts talking about that. How do I share my friggin' screen here, people? I'm sorry, I'm such a Luddite. There it is. Let's take a look at my desktop. Where is it? Still getting to learn my new computer. Okay, so now you can see Zoom somehow. All right, can everyone see the text? Hopefully, okay.
Yes.
Look at this. So this is interesting. This is on page 5. Aristotle is also a total snob. So oftentimes he'll be talking about the many and the few. And the many is this term you might have heard before, hoi polloi. It's a Greek term which sometimes is still used by, like, I guess, snotty people to refer to Joe Q Public, John Schmuck out on the street, just regular people, basically us. And then, you know, he'll talk about the refined, which is probably Aristos, which, like, the better people, by which he meant people that have leisure to worry about stuff and think and be wise. All right. So, but this, look at this phrase here. The many and the refined say that it is happiness, blah, blah, blah. I'm skipping the previous page. And they suppose that living well and acting well are the same thing as being happy. Let's put a button on that. But as for what happiness is, they disagree. And the many do not give, the many do not give a response similar to that of the wise, like me, says Aristotle. The former, that is the many, just anybody you ask on the street, they'll respond that it is something obvious and manifest, such as pleasure or wealth or honor, some saying it is one thing, others another. Now here's the key, I think, that responds to Emily's point. Often one and the same person responds differently. For when he is sick, happiness is health. And when he is poor, happiness is wealth. So this is what this is Aristotle kind of invoking a common idea, which he thinks is not correct, or not the best way of looking at happiness. But it's what we're talking about. The idea that everybody has their own happiness, and it depends on your circumstances and your context, your privilege, everything else. So this is what the common idea about happiness is. This isn't what Aristotle thinks happiness is, at least not eudaimonia. These wouldn't qualify. So these things exist for him, but this isn't what we're trying to talk about. Does that make sense? He grants everything you guys have been saying. Different times in your life, you might find happiness in different things, and different people are going to find the way to be happy in their tasks in different ways. But he wants to talk about the higher happiness, like what it is to be happy in just the most human way, because he thinks, and this is the kicker that is very hard, I think, for us moderns to understand, or us non-Aristotelians to understand, that there is a definition of happiness that we all share. There's a way of talking about happiness that includes everything that we would say happiness is. And we're not quite there yet, but I think we're getting there. Anyway, Madia, if you still have a thought.
Oh, well, I was just going to mention that I think that the idea that I don't know. I think that the idea that we do the things we do because they will bring us happiness is not always correct. I think that a lot of people do things and they don't have the self-awareness to understand maybe why they are doing them, or in some cases they are doing them with the purpose of um, making themselves sad, right? Like listening to sad music or watching a sad movie, or um, I would say like maybe um, if you know you're going to see someone that you don't like, going to see that person anyway because you just feel like getting into an argument that day. It's like that doesn't lead to happiness. And I wouldn't say that if you ask that person, they would be like, yes, I'm happier because I did those things, right?
Yeah.
But it is a human experience, not to discount that a human experience is not a good thing to feel. But I think that the idea that we do everything or most things, even long-term things, to seek happiness is a little bit unrealistic, because I think a lot of people do things not out of happiness, but out of other just human urges.
Yeah, no, that's great. And in parts of this actually very long book that we're not going to read, that becomes a major issue. The question of whether somebody can consciously and intentionally act for their own, toward their own unhappiness. Like, can someone really, would someone ever really do something in order to be unhappy? This becomes a problem actually both for Plato and for Aristotle. He doesn't dig into that in book one, but he gets near it. And I wondered if anybody had any thought about what Medea is saying, because it's critical. How can we get to happiness if sometimes we seem to act intentionally for all the world against our happiness? Yeah, I don't know. Abigail, you have your hand up.
I had a bit of a different thought, but on page 7, when he says money-making life is characterized by a certain constraint, I thought it was kind of interesting because like the American goal is almost to like work and make money. Like that's what Americans tend to do. We get educated to work and make money. And he's kind of saying like that's a constraint, like as in kind of a negative, which is like what we seem to be as a positive, like the wealthy or the happy and the poor or the sad, even though it's not entirely true. But I just thought it was interesting because I feel like he wouldn't like American society.
Right. I mean, you could almost, I think his criticism of a mentality, I hope I don't share that. I have never really done anything for money, but I know what you're saying. Yeah, so what you just read, the money-making life is characterized by a certain constraint. I'll keep reading. And it is clear that wealth is not the good being sought, for it is a useful thing and for the sake of something else. So remember, Aristotle is always trying to climb that hierarchy, the hierarchy of being, and up. And for him, the hierarchy is about what is better, 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 greater, better. The fact that he conflates what seems like, by the way, the fact that he conflates what seems like the class system of Athens into his philosophical system is like the major problem with Aristotle's philosophy. It's almost as if he's saying, well, we don't want to do things for just food because that's what slaves do. And we don't want to do things for just money because that's what merchants do, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, it's like, who's at the top of this? Philosophers, obvious, of course, because, okay, anyway, but I guess his critique here would be like, and maybe many Americans would agree with it if they just sat down and thought for a split second. Most of us can. It's not the money that we really want. It's what we get with the money. So he says that, I mean, maybe this is what he's sort of doing here, I think, is saying like, all right, let's lay out all of the things that we really want on the table. And any one of those things, if the reason we want it is to get something else, we throw it off the table, right? So money, that can't be the end, because if I have a whole room full of money and it's not getting me anything that I want, then what's the point? No, we don't do that. We buy things, all right? So money can go. and the stuff that we're buying, that stays on the table. So I buy, I don't know, Beanie Babies with my money. Why do I want Beanie Babies? In themselves, Beanie Babies aren't really worth anything. So what I want with the Beanie Babies is, well, some people want more money, and then maybe Aristotle would say they're getting caught in a stupid loop. But maybe some people are like, I'd like to cuddle my Beanie Babies. All right, throw the Beanie Baby off because what you want is cuddling. And so the idea, though, here is that if we do this game with all of these things hypothetically on the table and throw them off, we will get to nothing but one thing. There'll be only one thing left on the table, and that's happiness, eudaimonia, if that makes sense. So he grants everything you guys have been saying, that we all have these individual things that their happiness is gotten to by different ways, but those ways we would throw off the table because what we want is happiness. It's built in. He says that this is human, fundamentally. Eudaimonia, being the goal of, in a way, the goal of humanity is eudaimonia. I'm kind of anticipating here. I want to get back to something Medea said, which is the question of what we intend to do. What are our intentions in doing stuff? Is it always for happiness? What if we do stuff and we don't really understand what we're doing? And we fail to get to happiness, but it's mainly because of I don't know, a confusion or something, not being aware of not even really being aware of why we're doing something. Of course, Aristotle would say, well, then you need to examine your life. But there's another way he would put it, and this is on page 18. And I'm going to rush us a little bit here because I'm aware of time. So let me get that up and then share my screen real quick. Share screen again. Tell me what you think of this. I mentioned earlier when I was fishing for comments, I was like, is there anything in here that you just sounded bizarre to you, right? This sounds bizarre to me. Let's look at it. It is to be expected then that we do not say that either a cow or a horse or any other animal is at all happy, for none of them are able to share in such an activity. That is, he's already kind of in between where we were a minute ago and now. He's defined happiness as an activity. So let me pause on that for a second before we come back here. So remember last time I left us with the question, is happiness a state of being happy? In which case, is there a state that doesn't come and go? Or does happiness come and go in our lives? Or is there a state of happiness in which once you get it, it's there forever? Is it something that you can come to possess and you won't lose? Or is Thomas Jefferson's phrase pursuit of happiness kind of tautological, and happiness itself is the pursuit? In which case one might say something like, well, dang, and then if you ever get happiness, like if you ever stop the pursuit, then maybe you're not happy anymore. That would be weird. But that's the sort of how desire works, right? Like I desire a thing, and as soon as I get the thing, the desire is gone. I have the thing, but then you might build a new desire because we seem to always want to be in desire. Okay, then the other question I had is happiness something that we have to get and possess? Or is it a property that we possess? Or is a property, that is, it's something that's already here all along and I just need to express it or something? Yeah, so is happiness like a state, or is it a pursuit of something? Well, for Aristotle, one thing he concludes, and we'll look at this passage in a minute, is that happiness is an activity. I read one of the lines, it's acting well or living well. It's an activity. It's not a state, it's an activity. It's doing something. So what does that look like? Well, this weird comment, I think, can get us closer to what it is that this activity of eudaimonia is. Eudaimonia is an active thing, an activity. Okay, so it is to be expected then that we do not say that either a cow or a horse or any other animal is at all happy, for none of them are able to share in such an activity, the activity of happiness. It is because of this, too, that a child is not happy either. He's not yet apt to do such things on account of his age, though some children are spoken of as blessed on account of the expectation that they will do this. What do you make of this? How can we say that my cat, I don't have a cat, I get in the room, but how can you say my cat's not happy when it's sitting there purring? How can you say my child isn't happy? Like, no mother would admit that when their child is giggling and smiling up at them, that child isn't happy, right? What do you think? What do you make of this? Do you agree? Is there a way to agree with him? Abigail, what do you think?
I mean, like, it's kind of like confusing because like a dog, like they can do certain actions that make them happy. Like my dogs like to run, they like to go fetch balls and stuff. So is it to say those actions don't make them happy? Like, I don't understand.
Right. How can we not say that a dog is happy when you see it doing it's doing what a dog does, right? It's doing what a dog does when it's happy. It's wagging its tail, it's running after the ball, whatever. But Aristotle says no. What do you think, Jacqueline?
So, okay, so now I'm confused because at first I thought Aristotle was referring to action as being the thing of happiness. Am I correct?
Happiness is an action. That is to say, it's not a thing that you can get. All the things that we could get in the sort of blunt sense have been ruled out. But what he means is that happiness is us doing something. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense because especially when you think of like the child or even the pet, because children, if they're playing with their favorite toy, then of course that's going to bring them joy, which in a sense is happiness.
But Aristotle says no.
So I guess I rebuttal with Aristotle and I disagree with him.
Yeah. No, it's very easy not to disagree with Aristotle most of the time. And I grant you that this makes no sense. Although what it does is, and this is what I warned us would happen, is that it turns out what we mean by happiness isn't what he means by happiness, right? I think Courtney, well, Tanya might have had her hand up first. I don't know, Tanya, since I haven't heard from you yet, let's go with Tanya.
So the first time I read this reading was 2 years ago in like honors moral philosophy. So we like covered all of Nicomachean ethics, and the way that our definition in when we were talking about if something is moral or not never included animals. So we always did not, it was never involved in the conversation because of the concept that they weren't considered like sentient beings and only humans in that sense could be virtuous or could perform like moral actions.
Right. That's a good point of departure for getting at what's different about this version of happiness than ours, I think. Well, let's put it this way. What's a good example? Okay, take a dog. Well, if you saw a dog just run up to somebody and just kill them, just kill someone, right? Would you call it murder? Can you attribute the intention that we need for a human to be said to be a murderer to a dog? Right?
No, because I think it brings back the whole like if you go through a legal standpoint, they're going to be like, who was their handler, what kind of training did they go through? It'd be considered manslaughter on the owner of the dog,
right,
in that sense. So we don't tend to put that responsibility on animals.
Right. Okay. So there's some sense in which human intentions we admit legally and commonly are different from a dog. Yeah, but we still punish the dog. That's a good point, right? But I don't think we punish them because we think it'll be correct. Like, well, maybe it would be corrective. We don't punish them because we think that they did a moral wrong in the way that we would punish a human who murdered somebody. We have this difference. We don't say that the dog has the capacity to make the decision to murder, I think. And I'm going to speed up because I'm very conscious of time and I want to kind of get to the point. But Courtney, pause that. But you're okay. So there is a different way that we treat animals and humans all the time. The question is, should we do it with happiness? And Aristotle says yes. And in the way that I'll try to develop in 5 minutes after this, I think I can agree with what he means. But Courtney, and then I'm going to have to sort of bolt through some stuff.
Well, I was just going to say, so like, even though a lot of philosophers that we've read in like bioethics or anything have just kind of say that animals don't have any moral conscience because they don't have a conscience itself. Or that's what it's believed by a lot of philosophers. I also think a lot of people are confusing pleasure and happiness. So a dog goes and plays with a toy because it brings him pleasure and stimulation. That doesn't necessarily mean happiness. And you could say the same thing against lust and love. You might lust for someone or have pleasure being with someone. That doesn't always mean you love them. So
Yeah.
I think there's a fine line between pleasure and happiness.
Okay, so what you're alluding to here, Medea, you kill me, but we might have to miss you if I can get this out. I hope you're not going to kill me. But anyway, right. So we're being very careful with terms here. So eudaimonia does not mean happiness. What does it mean? Well, it's an action, and it's not just any old action. It is doing something well. So the final question I guess I have to answer this class period is, what is that verb that we're looking for? So a shipbuilder can shipbuild well, but we put away the shipbuilder now because we're trying to ramp up to the ultimate good of the human, right? So it turns out, and he makes this kind of explicit in a few ways here. I don't think I'm going to go digging for the screen at the moment. That we all have a job. We all have a verb that we're supposed to do well. And I told you at the beginning of the class, I was going to give you answers to the questions. Do you remember what the verb was? We human. A shipbuilder builds ships. A flute player plays a flute. We human, right? So let's take a flute player for a minute. I can have a flute player in front of me, and he can have his flute or her flute, and we'll make her a she. And she can have within her the capacity to play that flute to a superlative degree. She can be an expert flute player. But if she's not playing the flute, I wouldn't say that she is flute playing, right? So let's take the case of a human now. Put a human in front of me. The human can have the capacity to human. The human can have something in his hand, and there's an answer for this for Aristotle, that no other animal has, and that even a child doesn't have. But unless they're using that thing, at that moment, I can't say that they're humaning. So just like a flute player could play the flute well, but another flute player could play the flute better, and I can say that somebody is an expert at playing the flute. Humans can human well or not so well. Humans can be using that thing or not using the thing, and they can use the thing well or not so well. Happiness is doing our job very well, being a human very well, being a human to an absolute consummate degree. Using, what do we have in our hands? There's a couple words I could use for it. The one I've given you already is daimon. Doing daimon well. That's what it is to human. We have daimon. Babies don't yet have daimon. Animals don't have daimon. There's another word for that he throws out, and this gets to a definition that I will try to find real quick and flash on the screen. He says here, the human good becomes an activity of soul in accord with virtue, and if there are several virtues, in accord with the best and most complete one. And a little bit up, he gives it even another way. The work of a human, this is that verb, anthropouesthai. What it is to be human, the most fundamental thing that we have, that we possess, that makes us different from all other animals and the babies don't have yet. The work of a human is an activity of the soul in accord with reason. This word is logos. It means reason, language, lots of things. And it's what Aristotle says in the Politics, a different book, is what makes us different from everybody else. So what we have here is, in a nutshell, a definition of what it is to be a human. And it looks analogous to what it is to be a flute player. A flute player stands in front of you, and within them is this capacity to play the flute, and they're holding the flute. But if they're just standing there, they're not being a flute player. Similarly, humans are entities that have logos, and we have the capacity to use it. And we can use it as if it were an art or a craft, to anywhere from badly to like an expert. So we can all do this, and we all share this according to him. No matter what little things we're into, the buck stops at the human. So happiness is the activity of being human to a consummate degree, of expressing yourself and using your reason to the absolute degree. And that's why children can't do this, because they don't yet have enough logos, language, reasoning. And that's why animals can't do this. But yeah, we have this job of being human. We can become expert humans, but we have to be doing it. That's the thing. We can't just stand there with our logos. We have to be actively performing humaning. That is happiness. That is the ultimate happiness, to express ourselves, to become expert humans. So the reason this book is, if that's true, Aristotle is writing something like the coolest, weirdest, most important book ever. It's the instruction manual for being a human. You get a Ford F-150. It comes with an instruction manual. I can take that manual out and put it in another Ford 150 and it'll still work. It'll work for any Ford F-150, not just the one that it came with. Similarly, this book aspires to be the instruction manual for humaning to the utmost degree, which I think is pretty cool. Someone's bailing on me already, which means we're probably out of time. Since we are out of time, I'm just going to have to apologize for not allowing any more comments, and let us chew on that until next week, where we get into something much lighter. You're welcome. But I'll wish you all a good weekend, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great weekend.
You too.
I actually have a quick question.
Sure, anybody who wants to stick around.
Mine is about the hallmarks, because I can't get onto my Pathbright. Like, I tried like doing the forget thing. I've
Yeah.
tried every email, like our old like PHIL499
The
email.
PHIL499, usually it is the PHIL499 that needs to get in there.
I have not gotten a single email to get my stuff out of Pathbright.
I am gonna, there's a guy named what's his name, Tom Schrand, who's like the expert at this crap. So I'm gonna put you in touch with him, or I'll throw an email to you and him and CC you, and he might be able to find somebody that can get you on there.
Okay, cool. Thank
But
you.
yeah, what sucks is that stuff is just like trapped there until you liberate it. So we want to make sure all that work isn't lost.
Yeah, well, I just want to be able to start seeing like what I actually need to get done, like in this short period of time. But also, like, I know some of my old assignments are in Blackboard too, and I don't even know how to get onto like our Blackboard if I need stuff from like old classes.
Oh my God, that sucks. Let's see, that might be out of this guy's range of expertise.
That would be fine, but as long as I can at least get the stuff from Pathbright.
Pathbright. Okay. Yeah, I'll just write in a few minutes. You'll get an email, hopefully connecting you to this guy who knows knows how to do this.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. See you, Rafaela.